Good evening, everybody. 6:30, so I think we can start. Members are encouraged to obtain any points of clarification on the reports on the agenda in advance of the meeting, and members of the public will be invited to speak at the relevant item. So I'm just going to read out the fire evacuation procedures. So there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through the reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. Webcast of meetings. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Please can I remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, that you must speak directly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved so it is as close to your mouth as possible. Please don't move them around because it upsets the cameras, I believe. And also, can you please switch your phones off or turn to silent? Thank you. So I have down one apology. Councillor Kay Watts is replaced by Councillor Jenkin. Are there any other apologies or substitutions? Okay, lovely. And I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Do I read out the bits in black as well? Okay, yeah, right. So any, sorry, I just skipped out the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Okay, so right, we now move on to item 4, which is the appointment of a vice chair. And we're going to appoint a vice chair to the Resident Services Committee for the 24-25 municipal year. Are there any nominations?
I propose Joseph. I propose Jo Simmons.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Thank you, Ron. Is there any other nomination? Or that is that agreed? Brilliant. That was easy. Joe, do you want to come and sit up here? Okay, we move on to item 5, which is the minutes of the now disbanded Community Environment and Partnerships Committee, which was held on the 13th of March. I just will now like to move that the minutes of the meeting be signed as a correct record. The only thing that can be discussed is their accuracy. Is there anybody who wishes to correct anything on the minutes? Okay, I will duly sign them. Okay, and now we will move on to the main item on the agenda tonight, which is the council motion to consider the temporary ice rink provision. So this paper considers the provision of the temporary facilities for ice hockey and ice skating whilst repairs are undertaken to the existing ice rink, and is in response to a motion proposed at council on the 22nd of February 2024. So Cabinet Member Councillor Gavin James is going to introduce the report.
Good evening, members. Thank you, Jackie. I'm supported this evening by Mike Omani from our sports and leisure team and Daniel Garnier from our events team. Whether a temporary ice rink is a sport and leisure facility or a temporary facility and event is something why they've been working together on this. To give you some a brief update on where we are with the permanent ice rink, because I think it's timely we do that, because it's part of the conversation. We are progressing well with that. Now, when we started this journey, you'll remember the challenge was that Planet Ice wouldn't do the work without security of tenure, because their lease was running out, and the head lessee was reluctant to extend that without security of knowing that their business would operate and they'd get rental income forever for the term of that lease. And obviously in the background is us as the freeholder of the land. Obviously we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we don't put taxpayers' money at risk and accept any liability or mitigate against any liability. Those negotiations have been ongoing and made good progress. You would have seen reports about the ice rink closing in July. That may be premature. I don't know where they've come from. There is certainly hope that we'll be in a position to finalise the agreement by the end of this month. I put a caveat on that always, because nothing's agreed until it's all agreed and signed. But I think we are in a position, I'm more confident now than I was a year ago, that we are going to be in a place where we can start the ball rolling. That lease agreement will include that the ice rink, this work must start on phase 1 of the repairs, which is the ice pad, within 3 months of the contract being signed, and those works will be completed within a year of that date. So we are at a point where the ice rink is likely to close. It's likely to be this year. I can't give you a date because I'd be surprised if Planet Ice have the contractors lined up. I struggled to get an electrician in 24 hours. So to get someone to fix an ice rink that quickly, if they can do it, that's amazing. But I know they are keen. Every conversation between the officers and Planet Ice have been, we want to get this thing done. So that's the current status of the ice rink, which leads on to this paper around a temporary ice rink. We'll refer back to the comment I made when the motion was moved. My big concern is it's very difficult to plan a temporary ice rink until you know when you want it and how long for. And obviously at that stage, we didn't know. We are getting closer to knowing when we'll need it and how long for. Again, the caveat, I don't know how you know what you need to do to an ice rink ice pad when it's sitting under obviously a layer of ice, a layer of perspex, lots of sand and lots of frozen chalk. There could be some surprises under there. So that's the situation at the moment. Obviously, the council asked for this. It's an officer-led report based on the research they've done. Again, there was a slightly casual remark in one of the media posts around the Ice Users Forum around Googling it. That is taken slightly out of context. The reality is we don't have a temporary ice rink department. So we rely on our events, because obviously people turn around to Daniel all the time and say, can I have a sound system and a stage? The first thing you say, when do you want it for? And he'll find out. And Mike obviously has the expertise and has been checking stuff. During the process, we've also met with the Ice Users Forum, both from the ice hockey side of it, the ice dance side of it, and Sally Cashman herself, to get a clear understanding of what it is that they actually want and what they can actually do. We've used that information to deliver what is here today. I think the report pretty much spells out the situation in terms of the ice hockey team. There is a certain size that they need. Michael is more up on the technicals of that, and it needs to be real ice for them to compete. They can't compete on temporary ice, so if the temporary ice route would mean we lose ice hockey regardless. And also ice dance, obviously to practice, you can practice on a artificial ice, but actually for our more advanced ice dancers, they wouldn't be able to do what they do on a small rink. So that's the situation we're in. Obviously, you can see the timings aren't helpful to us. Really here today, as always, to listen. We won't make promises we can't keep. We're here to listen to your ideas and thoughts on where we go from here and what's appropriate and sensible. I will remind members that we presented a budget in February. It was fully agreed by council. It's a balanced budget. It has no provision for this. If we were to move quickly, if there was a request for additional funds, then we would have to make an in-year budget amendment, and we'd need to be very confident that that budget amendment went through. So if anyone is thinking that we might need to spend a lot more money on something, it would be really good to understand how they're what their support in terms of paying for it, because ultimately it's a reduction in services or increased fees charges somewhere within the council to meet it. Because it's a temporary ice rink, it is a revenue matter, so it can only be, we've got to get it out of our revenue budget. That's the only guidance. Other than that, I'm here to listen and answer any questions, although I'll probably defer them to Mike and Daniel.
Thank you, Gavin. Mike, did you want to add anything?
I think, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor James has encapsulated the current situation nicely. If you just run quickly over the report and what's in it, then obviously you can open up to further conversation. So the report itself considers a response to the motion. The full motion can be seen in Appendix 1 of the report, and a lot of the information in that motion will be addressed at the next committee in September. In terms of the background, I think the report covers how long the leases are and the situation with the head lessee and the subtenant as well. In terms of the temporary facility, I can reassure members that we did more than just a Google search. We had a look at inviting people to submit proposals around options and costs for a temporary ice rink. We received, the report outlines the fact that we received 2 responses, one around real ice and one around synthetic ice. The dialogue emerged that the real ice wasn't an option as a temporary basis beyond the short-term period. And we do know from research that the cost for an actual real ice temporary structure is almost equivalent to a low cost of a basic permanent facility. So it's not too much difference in there. The temporary synthetic ice would meet the size requirements. However, as Councillor James has pointed out, isn't really suitable to some of the needs expressed by the Ice Rink Forum representatives. So the report does identify that it takes about £2 million a year, taking into consideration the hire and all the auxiliary costs associated with that. And there wouldn't be any spectator facilities either attached to that. The option was based on the premise that the temporary ice rink would be located in the car park at the leisure park. It would also need an agreed approach as to who would actually run the facility and cover the costs. It's unlikely that any ice rink company would take on the cost themselves. From a legal position, as it stands, the council is under no legal obligation to support either the existing ice rink or the setting up of a temporary ice rink. There's also a Subsidy Control Act which came into force on the 4th of January 2023. I think people it used to be like state aid related, but now it's called subsidy control. And it defines an agreement where a public authority provides support with a financial value to an enterprise, and this support gives the enterprise an economic advantage. So we would need to do a principles assessment with our colleagues to assess any subsidy and ensure that we are complying with the duties of any act. In the finance section, it just really expresses concern about the fact that it's difficult to estimate precisely what those running costs are, and I think Councillor James has outlaid the financial position of the council at the current time. Property services are focusing primarily on reaching a resolution around the contractual position on the existing ice rink. That's their focus, and hopefully, all being well, that will come to a conclusion quite soon. So in summary, the report states that the costs of providing a temporary ice rink are disproportionately high. There is the potential challenge of subsidy control, as the ice rink is a commercial operation. The timescale suggests it takes between 12 to 18 months to identifying a site to having it up and running, allowing for planning permission as well, any conditions that need to be met, and all site preparation. Given that this aligns with the completion of the contractual arrangements for the existing facility and the repairs that are being scheduled, it doesn't appear to provide any real benefit. So really that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to invite our speaker, which is Councillor Alex Lee, if he'd like to come and address the meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, members. I normally come very well prepared for a committee meeting to give a speech. Quite frankly, I'm appalled that this report has come to this committee. The motion itself has stated that you needed to identify with the ice users, the coaches, and all of the relevant leadership teams to understand the bare minimum to be able to provide a continuity of ice sports in Basingstoke. Now, I've spoken to those ice users, the Ice Users Forum, and yes, they did come in and have a nice jolly chat with Councillor James and the leader of the council. But at no point was there a discussion on what the bare minimum was required in order to provide ice, or the continuity of ice in Basingstoke. If they had had that discussion, the numbers that would be before you in the report would not be those numbers. These are rehashed numbers from a former report that was sent to this committee on providing temporary ice in a building from around 2019, I believe it was, where 5 sites were identified for a temporary ice rink, which would have been in essentially a proper building, the building of a proper site for it. This isn't what they're after. In fact, an email from Stuart Tempest, who's the chair of one of the ice hockey, or the junior ice hockey clubs, has stated that at a minimum, all they require is a 20 by 40 metre pad, which is not what's on the papers. And if we look back through history, something of similar size was actually provided by Slough Council, who put up a temporary rink at the cost of just under £500,000. Now, if we look at inflation, that's not anywhere near $1 million yet. So I actually ask that you reject this report from this committee tonight, because you are not given the correct numbers. I agree there needs to be debate, but I recommend, and this is the reason why I put it in the motion in the first place, why this needed a proper investigation, because this is a further instance of this issue being kicked down the road again. This has happened under successive administrations in this council. Everybody, and I'm not looking at those new councillors that were elected this year, but everybody that sat in that council chamber last year, previous councillors that have sat in the chamber over previous years, have all said that they support ice in Basingstoke. The reality is judged by actions, and that isn't the case. Either way, we would have known that the ice rink needed to close in order to do repairs. And Councillor James, I agree, how do we know what to have, when to have it, if we don't know when it's going to close? But the pre-work could have been done. It hasn't. And now we're faced with a situation where the pre-work and the time to do it essentially lines up with the work that is in with the repairs. How ironic, right? We've kicked it that far down the road that actually now we're just going to wait for somebody else to deal with it. We could have had time to do this. And now we're going to leave, and I appreciate I'm going to run out of time, Chair, but now we're going to leave a community just because their sport is played in a private building without a way of doing their sport. Take away from the fact that it's in a private building, a privately owned building. We've got children who are now going to have to travel across the southeast to play ice hockey, to go figure skating. We have got coaches for figure skating who are essentially private businesses, small businesses of their own, that have got nowhere to work from.
Can you wrap up, please, Alex?
Certainly can. So, as I said, I don't agree with anything that's in this report because it's based on flawed assessments. And I urge you to have a fullest debate. And obviously, if you've got any questions for me, I'm willing to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Right, I'll now open the meeting to questions on the report first, please. Okay, yes, it's apparent at my discretion whether we'll have questions for Alex. Does anyone have any questions for Alex? And we don't want to get into a big discussion about it, obviously. It's just... Councillor Hussey.
You mentioned that the minimum size was a 20 by 40 metres. But competitive ice hockey, that is way below the minimum standard, isn't it? for which league?
So for NIHL level 1, which is what is required, it's 20 by 40.
Any other questions for Alex? Okay, we'll move on to questions on the report then. Thank you. Councillor Dillo.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lee, for coming tonight. Your motion asks for options to be looked at into the temporary ice rink to mitigate the loss of the facility that is, as you so elegantly said, is much used by the community and local businesses as well. Yeah, it's used by hundreds of people, professional coaches, and I feel that it is vital for our local economy and for our local jobs that we as a council look to mitigate the loss of this important facility whilst essential repairs are carried out. Now, unfortunately, I feel that the costs that were obtained back in 23, I think it was, for the large synthetic ice rink are really not fit for purpose, and by using them in this piece of work, it's really unhelpful and misleading. And these figures give the impression that any temporary rink would be too expensive and too lengthy to install. £2 million is astronomical, and it wouldn't really benefit the ice users at all. So the ice hockey teams have acknowledged that they won't have a rink and have disbanded for the seasons coinciding with the repairs. So what should have been sought for, following Councillor Lee's motion in last February, is new costings for a smaller, temporary, real ice rink that would be suitable for leisure and ice skating training purposes and allowing the small local professional coaches to continue working with local children and adults and keeping their businesses running. Now, obviously, this independent Liberal administration has loudly supported the notion of keeping ice in Basingstoke. So my questions, and there are a few, to the portfolio holder are: would you commit to providing a real ice, temporary ice rink for a 12-month period if the price was less than £1 million? And would you commit to asking officers to re-look at the costings and focus on getting quotes for a real ice rink, not synthetic, that is about half the size of the current rink, because that is what's needed? And I'd also like to point out, Graham Merry, who's actually in the room tonight, who's former editor of the Basingstoke Gazette and has lived and breathed ice skating for decades, has pointed out that there is a slight error and that the ice hockey league season starts in September. So it is a real priority that this gets going, because if they miss September 25, then there's going to be real problems there. So the deal needs to be signed yesterday to allow the Bison a proper ice rink to start playing in 25. Thank you.
Well, in answering the last one first, the deal can't, they can't start the work until the deal is agreed. I'm acutely aware that in September, this committee is going to overlook the decisions made 25 years ago that led to the 2000 decision, and whether that was right or wrong, or whether people jumped into stuff too quickly because of the pressure they felt at the time. I really don't fancy being dragged out of my old people's home in 25 years' time to come back and explain what I'm doing right now. So it's absolutely right that we take this seriously, do it properly and get it right. The commitment of the Independent Lib Dems is always to secure the long-term future in ice. That's the absolute priority for us, is to make sure the long-term future of ice is secured in Basingstoke. To start risking that by sort of jumping around and trying to get putting the temporary thing top of the list would be dangerous. Now, my understanding from the officers, they'll be able to confirm, is that they did revisit the figures. Obviously, in 2019, the then administration did look in quite considerable detail at a temporary ice rink. Obviously, those didn't go anywhere because they had the same problem that I've got. When do you want it and how long for? And they didn't know. We've probably got a better idea now, but I still don't know the date that I need it from. So that work was done. It's been refreshed since, is my understanding. Mike will be able to confirm, or Daniel will, that information was refreshed. I wouldn't want to commit to spending £1 million because I need to know where I'm going to get the £1 million from. The other thing that's in the paper is obviously the factor of the 18 months that it's going to take to set this thing up. Around planning processes, we've got to do a procurement exercise. Clearly, the council would not be running the facility. We'd need someone else to come in and we'd have to underwrite the risk that is associated with that. So I don't think it's possible. And the other thing is time. So it would take time to gather those figures. I mean, we can have a look at them. Not sure when we bring them back. But at the moment, the best information we're able to acquire is the information that you see on the report tonight. Unless Michael or Daniel have anything to add to that?
I think in terms of the quotes, we approached several suppliers to understand what was available and the cost implications. And I think, as Councillor James mentioned previously, we got 2 responses, one for realised and one for synthetic ice. The realised company, the biggest they could do was 15 by 20 metres. The biggest size that the realised company could do was 15 by 20 metres, which is under the minimum requirement. So we looked at the synthetic ice. They could provide 60 by 30, which is equivalent to the size in the current ice rink. So I think we need to consider that there's bringing the off-the-shelf ice rink, but it's also all the additional costs are linked to it. And that includes security. We need 24-hour security on site. We will need barriers. We need a cover for the ice rink. We need power. So I think it's not just bringing the ice rink in, it's all the additional costs that have to go next to it. And I think based on those estimations, we came up to the cost of 2 million for the 60 by 30.
Councillor West.
Hello. So I've got kind of 2 questions sort of in one here, both of them about how you came to the conclusions in the report. So I've heard 2 different things, I think, where you've said that you've opened it up to find suppliers, but then you've said you've proactively gone out to suppliers. So I'd like to understand where those figures came from, and was it proactive or reactive? Because those are 2 very different bits of work, like whether you've bothered to go out and actually find prices or just wait for them to come to you. And then also on the consultation of ice users, what did that actually look like? Obviously, we're being told one story, but the ice users are telling us quite a different story about what that kind of the questions asked of them, what information they were actually asked for. So if you could just clarify on both of those.
So on the quotation sort of a question, we proactively approach suppliers. I think we weren't in a position to actually kickstart a full procurement process because there were too many unknown. So we basically did a high-level exercise to understand what was available in the market and what the prices were. And as I said, we approached 5 different suppliers and only 2 came back with a response. On the engagement, I'll let Mike pick that one up.
Yeah, I mean, the other part of that is about the pricing. You talk about real ice and synthetic ice. Is on the real ice front, previously back in 2019, when this report went to the CEP committee and was considered there, I would appreciate something that Councillor Lee alluded to. We did a readjustment of what that would look like in 2024-25 if we were looking to build it, what it would look like in 2026. And we used a couple of core comparators with places like Cambridge in terms of the ice rink there, quite a basic setup, and the cost of what that would look like. And again, we come back to the same conclusions that we drew in 2019. Is that the principles were still the same in terms of the costs involved, particularly post-COVID, as supplies and infrastructure, the costs continue to go up.
Point. I've personally met with Stuart and Sally, and so on one occasion we joined by one of the Arts Dance people via Teams. We met them 3 times since the motion. We met once just before the election. Obviously during the election it was difficult to meet. On one occasion, and I can't remember which occasion it was, but it was when the ice dance lady, I'm trying to find it in my diary, I can tell you it was in the Kemp Shop room and upstairs, and I asked the question about what is it, because I doubted the cost that we saw in 2019, like do you really need a 300-seat spectator stand? Stuart Tempest said that was a very important part of it. Changing rooms are essential, toilets were essential, and the size of the rink, yes, there's some variation in terms of, he did say the size of the rink could come down slightly, but that size wasn't available in any event. So we have met a few times, we have had discussions. There's no minutes or recordings because they're informal discussions, because you can see and feel the passion that comes from the ice users, and understandably so. So we've kind of invited them in to have those conversations, to keep them up to date and informed in stuff that we can't necessarily say in public, but just so they have some idea of what's going on, because it's only right that we do that. So we did have a conversation. They did indicate what they needed, and those are factored into what we see now.
I'm going to, I've got some comments actually, because I've actually had a chat with Stuart today, and I've also contacted out to Slough Council and spoke to one of my colleagues over there, because they obviously put in a temporary rink, and which is what Councillor Lee was alluding to, and that went in for about 360, I think it was, and they also need some highway work and all sorts of things. Their planning on that one was for about, they expected to do it within about 6 weeks, but because of procurement issues in a local authority, it actually took about 5.5 months, so it did take longer. So that is obviously a factor in there. What I'd like to know is, have you actually approached and spoken to Slough as an example for a temporary rink? Because they clearly, this is where all the figures are coming from on this potential, saying this cost seems overinflated and there are other options there. So even if that hasn't happened, could that conversation happen? Because I think that could potentially do it. Could obviously make, change the situation for the money. And obviously this 12 to 18 months would then also be shrunk down, and there could be lessons to learn from there, which actually could make sure that things moved quite quickly. The other point I made with Stuart was talking about the issue around subsidy control, and the idea of what exactly was potentially on the table. Now, Stuart, when I asked him, he said, what exactly is your minimum requirement? This was an email this morning, and he came back with the 20 by 40, etc., etc. The one in Slough actually is 20 by 50. And I said to him, well, the issue we've got here as well with subsidy control, you've got to be careful, because we're talking about providing a public amenity. And I said, and this was something that was left up in the air, but I think it's something that also could be explored, whether there was any facility that provided for recreational ice, which would give a minimum, and then obviously some very basic training facilities, which could bring the cost down even less than the Slough offering. But it's a conversation that needs to be had. And I think, having sort of come into this and taken over this and sort of just done a little bit of digging around, I think that the biggest elephant in the room for this one, I think, is the fact that it feels that the conversations with the user groups haven't been concrete enough. I appreciate what Councillor James has said. He's picked up on the vibe, and he's picked up, and they've said basically this is it. But I think having that lots more negotiation discussion, which would then clarify exactly what options are and what it means to the local authority, and where they come from, basically in the negotiation around hammering down the requirements and saying we could possibly look at this. And then obviously if we're down to 500,000, then it's obviously still need to do a budget amendment and find where the money comes from, but that could change the picture. So I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did look at the Slough. If you go through their committee papers and you go back through their committee cycles, you can see exactly where the reports come from, alluding to the authority and, if you like, the decision to putting a temporary ice rink. I think that without knowing the full details of the facts about ownership, location, planning, had it all been preordained, had it all been put in place before they got that timescale in place, they're the things that we don't know at the moment. I would imagine by the time that Slough report did go through, a lot of those issues have been ironed out and addressed and ready to move forward as part of the planning application. So we are not at that stage, so it'd be difficult to compare timescales on a like-for-like basis. So we would need to do a bit of work beforehand to assess how far we would need to go to get to that position. In terms of costs, obviously we were taken, I think it's fair to say, we were taken on board the fact that the specification or the ask is different. We will need to go away and understand what that ask actually means and be able to come up with a, if you like, a more up-to-date reflection of what that actually looks like. I think that's something we probably have to take away.
Councillor Vaux.
Thanks, Chair. Just sitting and listening to everybody, I think Councillor Lee, I think, hit the nail on the head for me. I can't remember whether it was 2019 or not, but I can remember being chair of CEP when the ice rink was a really, really tricky subject. And we took a lot of confidential papers, we had a lot of discussions about it. And very much at the time, the assumption was that if we needed a temporary ice rink, it needed to replicate what we have now. And all the work was done on that basis, and it was deemed to be unaffordable. So for me, the big issue here is that that isn't what the users are really asking for, you know, and I think Councillor Lee has talked about it, Councillor Dillo's talked about it, you know, you've talked about it, Chair, and I think we have missed a trick here. We've made assumptions that it's a like for like when it isn't. It's about keeping the skills of skating on ice with, you know, the competitive side could happen elsewhere, but we can keep coaching and other elements of ice here. And surely it's not beyond the wit of the talents that we have in this council to make it happen. And I think we should ask for a commitment for that from this committee, and that is what my recommendation would be. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to agree with Councillor Vo and Councillor Lee. I think this report isn't fit for purpose, quite frankly. It's based on a set of assumptions from 2019, planning assumptions from 2020, costs from 2019, and it's no reflection on the officers, but it's coming up with the wrong answer because you're putting the wrong assumptions into it. What I've heard is that the conversations haven't been had with the user group to actually work out what it is we want. That then allows us to go away and come up with a mature set of figures. Because unfortunately, what's happened now is, I agree with Councillor Lee, this has just been kicked down the path. It's an easy path out because they don't want to commit to it.
Councillor Hussey.
I'm confused here because everybody's speaking as experts and they're quoting hearsay. There's nothing written down on paper. We've all got opinions, but they should be stated as opinions and not as facts. Everybody's trying to quote facts, which are in fact opinions. What we need now is not what somebody recalls speaking to somebody about 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago. We need a written document from the user group, working with our officers to state what their minimum is. And it's not just about leisure, it's also about competitive. What is the actual minimum? If it's competitive, you've got to have supporters there who are paying to pay for the teams for ice hockey. We need a definition of what's the minimum. And if the market can't provide that minimum, then that's it. But to suggest that we could start in September is, I don't know what you're smoking, but it's certainly illegal.
Councillor West.
Just both to echo and to add to the point about the use of the rink for both training and leisure, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that we're not just talking about sporting teams who use this is families who use it. Like, we're about to have summer holidays, and there'll be summer holidays next year if the work's not finished complete, and plenty of holidays in between where people go and use this rink for leisure all the time. Less and less these days because of the shoddy situation of the state of it. But if we fail to look at the fact that more than just the sports teams use this, then we're ignoring, like most of our constituents here, which would be a mistake for all of us. Also, the fact that there's training can be done on a synthetic rink, even if competitive games can't, is an important thing to keep in mind. Alex quite eloquently spoke about the fact that we've got a bunch of young people who are having to travel to train. And even if they can't compete this year because they haven't got a home ground, they should be able to carry on that training for the next year. They should be able to go there, train. The people who need that space to keep up those skills need to have that space. And if currently right in front of me it says synthetic option only viable for leisure, skating and training, and if we can keep both of those things here, why shouldn't we?
Councillor Slimin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit confused, but then that's not unusual. We've been asked to look at real ice at a smaller size, and we've also just heard that perhaps an artificial one might be okay. Now, obviously, reading the papers, the artificial one could be perhaps delivered in the car park on our land, and that means we have some control over where that's going to be. My question is, if we have real ice, have we got anywhere in Basingstoke that we could actually deliver that in a building that happens to be currently spare, that we could go through planning to try and get it. I am not aware if anybody has actually looked to see whether there are suitable sites where we could actually have that. And again, we go back years to actually supporting ice in Basingstoke. Many of you may recall that the bison were originally owned by this council when I was Vice Chair of Leisure, and I've got pictures of me doing the puck. So we have actually supported ice in Basingstoke for many, many years. Okay, we had to give up the ownership of it because it became too expensive for us. So we had a difficult position made then, but we did manage to continue with the ice over the years. And obviously a lot of people support the bison. I think we possibly now need to sit back a little bit and have a look at see where we could deliver either real ice if we've got availability of land and or temporary ice. But I do think that the costings at the moment that we hear are very high, and we've all got to say what it is that if we go along that route, what we are not going to do instead. Otherwise, we are in a difficult situation. I mean, what would, the county council are currently asking people, do you want to stop doing this? Are you going to give up libraries? Are you going to give up whatever? We have got those difficult decisions to make if we are going to add something to our budget this year, because we do need to get on with it this year. We can't leave it, because otherwise we'll have a temporary ice rink just in time for the real ice rink to be repaired, all being well. So we're against the time. And I'm sorry, but obviously in 2019, we weren't running this council and I wasn't on it. So obviously what's happened in the past, which is now 5 years ago, things have moved on since then and costs have gone up because we all know that everything's gone up. So again, I don't think we can compare what was going on in 2019 with what is actually going on today. But there may be possibilities that we have more buildings that have been made empty because people have given up leases. There may be more possibilities than we had in 2019. So I would hope that this committee would agree that we go back a little bit and perhaps come up with some more information. Maybe, obviously, the Cabinet will have to look at that and look at what we could do within the money and whether there are suitable places within the time frame that we've got. And we've got very little time because, as everybody said, September 25, they want to have somewhere to play. They may be able to play at the real ice rink, and that's what we would certainly hope for. But in the meantime, how much time and effort can we spend on trying to get something in that may not actually be delivered in the correct time? So I think we've got to be a bit wary of spending too much time and effort in trying to deliver what at the end of the day is impossible to deliver in the time frame. And maybe whoever was on the council in 2019 should have actually done more work at the time. And I'm not going to take the blame for doing something that didn't happen in 2019. But I think what we do need to do is say, what can we do now to realistically, very quickly, look at the options and see whether there is anything that we could deliver within a much more reasonable budget.
Councillor McIntyre.
I'll try not to be as long as that. Just to clarify, I wasn't a councillor in 2019 either. And I don't think a lot of us were. And I think that's most probably fundamentally the problem we have with our public, in that we keep pointing fingers at each other rather than actually looking at what's on the table in front of us. We're not going back to redo decisions in 2019. We're looking at decisions that's in front of us in 2024, which is the motion that Alex brought forward. I think to get back to your point on the do we need temporary, do we need real ice, and Councillor Hussey's comments as well, I think it goes back to the fundamental point I was making. Right now we're just making assumptions because it's not written down in black and white what it is we actually need and what we need to go out to spec, because that will actually answer a lot of the questions. If the minimum spec we require we actually can't get in the time that we need it by, that answers a lot of questions. But more importantly, it allows us to go back to our residents and say we've actually done the work that you've asked us to do. We have actually looked at this. We haven't just picked up an old report and refudged it and changed the signatures at the bottom of it. Thank you.
Councillor Hussey.
I'll be very brief. We've got to define the problem first and get that agreed, and stop talking about speculation about what we need, when we need it, where it's going to go. Let's define the problem and get that agreed with the ice users, and the minimum expectation and something short of a permanent solution is there any middle ground requirement, something a little bit better than basic. But until we define the problem, we're wasting our time.
Councillor Dillow?
I think, I don't know whether the portfolio holder would be comfortable in saying how much he would be comfortable in spending to keep ice in Basingstoke. That was a question to Councillor.
It wouldn't be a case of me deciding what I'm comfortable with, it's down to full council, because if you're going to do a budget amendment, then we'd have to bring it to full council and we'd all have to agree it. What I would need to know is how prepared we are to raise the money in terms of fees, charges or council tax in order to fund that gap, because obviously if we did bring it to full council as an in-year budget amendment, I'd need to be confident it would go through at the first attempt, and if it didn't, then obviously the budget would be rejected. We couldn't include it because we have to maintain a balanced budget. So if we did think, so it's really a question for the committee, is how much would you be prepared to increase parking charges or increase council tax or cut services? Which services would you like to cut to raise the money to pay for it? Because there is a balance there, it's a choice thing. And I totally get it. I mean, we always said we'd rely on the wisdom of 54. Now at this stage, the quote we've got is 2 million. And obviously that's, you know, I wouldn't be able to find 2 million. Put it into context, we raised just shy of £2 million on car parking charges. So if we doubled them, and if that's what the Conservative group want, is car parking charges doubled, then that's the recommendation you can make. But I think we'd all struggle with that, and I think the Conservative group would struggle with that. But those are the choices we have to make. So it's really, I need a bit of help from the committee. I'm here to listen to what you've got, and if your instruction is go away, double check on what Slough did. I do notice Slough's budget the following year was overspent in their leisure services department quite considerably, and of course they then declared bankruptcy a year later. So I'm not sure I want to adopt the Slough approach, which is why I'm being slightly careful with whatever you decide you want to do will have to be paid for, and a steer from the committee over what you would like to look at in terms of fees, charges or service cuts needs to come with your proposal. Or you conclude that actually, given the timescales and the challenges, you'd prefer not to do that. And either is fine, and you can give us a mixture. Councillor Harvey sitting there, I can't make the decision, half the cabinet's there, but we'll need the whole cabinet to sit and consider everything the committee said and make a decision based on that.
I have a question for Gavin. We talk about this as revenue costs. Would it have to come out of revenue budget, or would it be not a capital spend, or is it because it's temporary, it is revenue?
It's temporary, it's not there a year later, so it has to come out of revenue.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thanks, Councillor James. The problem we've had is this has been sat on since Councillor Lee's motion. Now, the problem is you're throwing it to us to do all the work of what the report should have brought to us. I've just looked on BidStat, which is a government bidding process thing. There's 3 tenders, 3 RFPs out there. Provision of temporary ice rink complex in Cheltenham. Funnily enough, the budget's only up to £250,000. There's another one in Leeds. That was just the management for it though in 2022, but that was £100,000 to manage it. There's another one that's current right now in Tunbridge Wells that is looking for a delivery of a temporary ice rink for 5 years. Why did we not do that? That is where we can then bring it back to council with a figure that we actually understand, and then we can do the question about the budget. Because unfortunately what's happened right now is you've turned it right back on us when we don't have access to the information, we don't have access to actually how much it will cost. That is the job of the administration to come up with that detail, and I'm sorry, you're sloping your shoulders here.
Just to come back on that, first of all, you can't tender until you can produce the facts, because a fair tendering process is you lay out, this is what I want, this is when I want it, we're inviting bids for that. We are doing a speculative at this stage because I don't know when we need a temporary ice rink to open. And I'm not knocking the previous administration for 2019 because they had the same problem. And thank God the previous administration didn't get a temporary ice rink in 2020. wouldn't have needed it because of COVID. Thank God they didn't get one in 2021 because the ice rink was still open, and in 2022 because the ice rink was still open. That's the challenge. So what you're seeing on the government thing, that's where a local government can say, we want this thing at this time, you spec it out, you put it out there, and then the tenders come in, or you hope the tenders come in. Obviously, there's no guarantee that there are tenderers for those things, and the ice rinks vary from somebody who wants 5 years because they want a temporary ice rink whilst they're redoing the leisure park, which is something we were looking at in 2019 because of New River, etc., versus someone who wants a pop-up ice rink at Christmas to sit in a town centre. So that's why you see a very big cost difference. If we wanted a temporary ice rink that was quite small and going to sit in the middle of Festival Place, you'd start tendering now because there's a lot of competition. Winchester City Council used to do it every year, have an ice rink just for Christmas. They've stopped it. It got too expensive because prices have gone up. But that's the difference. We don't have a firm date and a firm idea of, so far, all we can do is go out there and look at what is available, what we could potentially draw in, and what is it likely to cost us. Whereas they've obviously got a specific budget set aside, planning a long time in advance. Very hard to plan in advance when, even today, if I could get an ice rink set up in 4 weeks' time, what if the ice rink's got another 8 weeks before they can start the contractors working? Then what? So that's the challenge we've got, is the timing.
Councillor Fawkes.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're going down rabbit holes here. I think let's go back to the paper. We're being asked to respond to a paper that was written to a council motion to explore how the council can provide temporary facilities within the borough. This paper doesn't answer that because we haven't got the data, the core data about what is actually required. So I think we're being asked to solve problems that we don't have the data for, and I do think we need to go back. This committee needs to ask the portfolio holder to go back and get data about what is required, and then and explore that. That you can't find funding for something you haven't actually defined. So I think we're going round in circles. I don't think it's helpful. I think we just need to go back to the basics. Let's find out what's needed. Let's get it drawn up and start again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fawkes. I was actually I don't know, is there anything different, Councillor West? Because to be honest, I was going to sum up on where we're going with this because I think we are going round in circles. And I think really just summing up where we're at, I think people aren't content with this report as it currently stands. I think what we're looking here is basically to say we need to go back. There needs to be that clear discussion with the users to get the basic minimum, to get that written down, because I think even if there was the intention and expectation that the users had been listened to and that had been put into this report, and that was all done in with the best spirit, I think what's happened is it hasn't come across that way. So basically those conversations need to happen, and there needs to be something concrete that we can then work with. And then once that's done, that can be reviewed. And then there was a comment from Councillor Hussey to say once we get that, then we can work out whether or not it's feasible. Because obviously if suppliers can't meet those basic minimums, we still haven't got the costs. So then we get the costs. That then needs to be reviewed and looked at. And then once that's reviewed and looked at, we then look at whether or not it's feasible from a financial and time aspect. And that's obviously a full council thing, and whether there needs to be any budget amendments, and then where the decision goes from that. Does everyone agree that sounds like kind of pretty much what everyone said? Time is always a good idea. So I don't know if anyone wants to put some input into what they think would be a reasonable timeline. And I think I would look with respect to the officers, because they know their workload, as to what would be a reasonable time for doing this.
If I may, I think one of the challenges we have is there's a very big difference between doing kind of a speculative search, kind of looking at what's available and what it would cost, and doing a full procurement process. And I don't think we're at the stage of actually going to the market with a full specification. So the costs we're going to get back are always not going to be 100% exact, if it's what I mean. And we're not in a position at the moment to actually launch a full tender process because there's too many unknowns. And I think, until we've actually agreed there is a budget for a temporary ice rink, we can't go to the market with a tender process.
Just to raise another challenge, I mean, ultimately, we are totally dependent on an operator, because I don't think any of us know how to run an ice rink. And so we will need, it's beyond just getting a temporary ice rink. Now there's a conversation with Planet Ice, who clearly have some expertise in the ice world, but we'd have to find both things. So the land we can probably secure because it's behind the existing site, and that gives us some power advantages and stuff like that. But we would need to find not just the facility, but also an operator. So we've got to look at a specific, there are providers that will deliver and run, because we can't just get the facility and then go play, because it doesn't work that way. So there's a bit more to it in terms of finding that, and as Daniel says, all that is about a loose conversation about could it be done, and what do you think the costs were. The other thing we don't know, which I think is and this is where the risk bit scares me, because obviously you can go and do the expense of getting an ice rink and getting an operator, and people will pay to use the ice rink. Depending on what you get will depend on how many people use it, because if you've lost the ice hockey teams, then you've lost a massive slice of the business. Stuart's regularly telling me how much money he spends to run those teams and provides to Planet Ice for that. So it's a very complex piece of work to do, and obviously we need to understand what risks we're taking on as a council in terms of what can be paid for. But I mean, we can take it away, can have a look. I don't know, when's your next meeting?
18th of September.
I look to you two. Then potentially an update, it might be a verbal update, but we'll have written confirmation from the ICE users exactly what they need by that point.
I think having the written confirmation from the ICE users, I think, is one of the key issues here. And then obviously totally take on board your comments about, getting suppliers. Interestingly enough, Slough went to their current leisure providers, and I believe it was Amy that were running it. So I don't know if there is extra, whether Amy would be the sort of person that would do that. But that's obviously something, it might be worth having a conversation with Slough, irrespective of their financial things. Don't talk to them about finance, talk to them about the ice rink. Councillor West.
I'll try and keep this brief, sorry to prolong this anymore. We've heard the challenges, we know what's missing from the report. In fact, a lot of these challenges seem known to you but aren't in the report for whatever reason. It doesn't currently meet any of the things that the motion set out because it doesn't have any of the information about the investigation and what that created. So that's one thing we're missing. Also, I don't understand how you can ever get to a place where you can achieve something like this if you can't decide to get the prices until you've decided to do it, until you've decided to get the prices, until you've decided to do it. It feels like a loop you can't break. And maybe that's a flaw in our system more than a flaw in your work, but I'm just trying to understand what is the missing piece and why haven't we been able to find it?
I think, as I said, there's doing a full tender process where you actually have a defined specification, a defined budget, and you go to the market and people tender. And there's the market testing exercise, which is what we did, understanding what's out there in the market. Are there any providers that could provide a solution, and what would be sort of the indicative cost initially? Because no supplier is going to give you a full cost breakdown if you're not doing a full tender process. And some suppliers didn't come back to us because we weren't doing a full tender exercise. But as I said, to do a full tender exercise, we need to have all the pieces of the jigsaw, because there is no point in us going to the market and wasting supplier time if you're not going to move forward with it.
Why weren't those other pieces in the report already, though? This was a motion from February that we've also known about for years. It feels like lots of time spent putting no work into the report and just coming back with, we needed more information, but not finding the information that was needed.
Councillor James.
I know I've said it before, we must not lose sight of the fact that until you know when and for how long, it's really difficult, because the suppliers who have the kit to put up a temporary ice rink have so much kit. And so if we happen to be the 11th person to turn up at the door of a temporary ice rink hirer who's got 10 kits, it doesn't matter, they can't provide it. So we've always needed to know, and I have sympathy for those who held the portfolio before me. You need a date. There's no point getting a quote for a replacement kitchen.
What's standing between us and a date?
Well, the fact is we don't know when the ice rink is closing. We've got a fair idea now, but 8 weeks ago I didn't have any idea at all. Now I've got a fair idea that at some point in the next 3 to 4 months it is likely to close. However, go onto the Gazette website, look at articles in 2016 saying ice rink likely to close imminently. So for 8 years, it's been on the edge of it's struggling. We know that date's getting closer, but it's very difficult. If I turn around to Daniel and I say, Daniel, I want a temporary ice rink. I want it for 12 months. I want it to open on the 1st of January 2025. Go out and this is the money we've got available for it. Then we can go through that process. And if the quote comes too high, we have to make a decision. But we can do that. What we're doing at the moment is saying at some point, what's now boiled down to probably the next 6 months, but I could be here in 6 months' time saying we haven't reached an agreement yet, because that's been going on since 2016, these discussions. What I can't do is give Daniel the definitive date. So that's the biggest issue. And what you don't want is to rent an ice rink and it's too late or it's too early, because what are you going to do with it? So that's the challenge. And I mean, Slough must have had planned works because they knew they were doing a complete knockdown rebuild. So they must have known more than we do. But we're relying on a third party who actually owns the ice rink and the agreements to come into play, which have kept myself and Councillor Isaac before me very, very busy. But Councillor Isaac had the same issue I've got. He didn't have a date. So even if there was interest in a temporary ice rink, until you have a clear, defined, this is what we want and how long for, it's actually very difficult.
I think I've got 2 more questions on here, but there is a point actually that Councillor James just made. Slough's ice rink is owned by Slough. So therefore they did have planned work to do. So I think that is actually a very valid point. I've got 2 more. So this is Councillor Dillo and Councillor McIntyre. And I do want to draw a line under it because I do think we are going a little bit round in circles.
Yeah, I think the point that was made was not about going out for tender. It was about having all that information in front of us that you would put into a tender, because that's the information that actually gives you your requirements that you need to go out for. Right now we don't. Right now we're speculating, and I think that's what everybody's said there. So it's not about going out for a tender, it's about pulling all that information together so we actually know, as an example, would we look for ice and operator? Would we look for a 1+ contract with a renewal? What specification size do we need? It's just that information that we need to pull it in to give us a better idea to go out and get a cost.
And Councillor Dillo. Okay, I think that's it. So I think the ask from this committee is really that we make sure we get some concrete negotiations and then a written report from the users to date, explaining the different options from very, very basic minimums, which could be just like a little training recreational rink, whether it's synthetic or real ice, and then also what was the other bit? And then we come back, bring that back in September. And I think we're going to go onto the work programme anyway, and that's also, I think next in September we're looking at doing the rest of the motion. So it looks like we will just basically cover the whole motion in September, but we'll cover that now in the next item. So moving on to item 7, review of the work programme. Thank you, Gavin. Okay, so the next all we've got currently on September, the 18th of September, is the ice rink motion review. So I think considering if we've got an updated report on this, that is probably going to be enough. Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, it's not listed on any of the work programmes of CEP and EPH, but there was the motion for soft play that they are meant to come back and give us a report to council. That is out of date. Now we'll let them off because there's been a couple of elections in between. But perhaps for the next one, an agreement amongst the chairs, do we bring it to resident services or do we bring it to the name of the other one? Yeah.
I think now soft play, was it looking to get something run by the council? And if it's there, for it potentially would become under leisure, which would be under this, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so the motion wasn't about the council running it. The motion was for council to explore options of attracting the industry back in to Basingstoke. And I think that was a clear point that we'd made at the time, was it's not about council operated services, but it's about exploring what can we do to attract the private operators back into town.
So, looking at the work programme, we've got November. We're doing the review of accelerated affordable housing delivery with Fiona, and also the review of the housing allocation scheme, which is basically the document that talks about how we do the choice-based lettings. Oh, and I've just been pointing some notes that I probably should be reading. So do we confirm and agree the items on the committee work programme? And there's also addition for the 13th of November meeting, the Housing Association Preferred Partner, which I can't remember what that is.
I think it's just recently been added.
Oh, okay. So what does it mean, Ellie? Help. So Ellie, she's sort of talking to herself. She's having a quick look. She will confirm it. We'll find out what that is. Are there any comments on the work programme other than that? I've soft play. So yeah, we haven't agreed to where we put soft play. I suppose it would be. I think we need to keep the ice rink as its own item on September. So I think November probably be the earliest we could entertain it. But I think we'll have a chairs meeting before that, won't we? Jo.
There is a task and finish group looking at the leisure park, which Abigail Compton used to run. Obviously, she's no longer the chair, but I'm the vice chair, and we've already had discussion. We've got a meeting on the 5th of September to have a look at that. I think it would be useful to have a report from that task and finish group, potentially. Obviously, just a feedback report in that September meeting, if we could do that. Because the leisure park is moving on, and obviously the ice rink is part of the leisure park. But obviously, to move forward and see where we've got to, it would be perhaps useful to be able to just give that an update. It'd be a very short paper, but obviously just to let you know where we've got to. We've tried to have various meetings, and most of the time it's just been difficult to move forward. But we have had some meetings, and there will be a meeting in September.
Okay, I think that'd probably be reasonable, wouldn't it, Ellie? If it's just a short report. Yeah. I think we've also got on here a task and finish group to review the LRNA.
Apologies, Chair. Can I just check on that it would be Residents Services Committee, because I think it might be Environment and Infrastructure Committee that would come under. Which one? The Leisure Park Task and Finish Group, because it was CEP. No, it's not. But I think that is on the work programme, Councillor Slimming.
Oh, right. Okay. So, apologies.
We do have the leisure recreational needs analysis at the bottom, which Jenny is pointing to. That's a different task and finish group. It's a new piece of work. She wanted to do some analysis across the different facilities.
So there are two task and finish groups. So prior to the elections, when this was CEP, we did have the Leisure Park Task and Finish Group, but now that's moved under E&I, and that will be on the agenda for their first meeting in September. Yeah. And then we've got the LNRA request, which went to the committee in March, but obviously with the elections and stuff, it's sort of paused, so that's for discussion now.
So is anybody here party to the discussions around this potential piece of work? Alex is. Can we allow Alex to give us a quick update?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. Obviously, I was the chair before the elections. So we had the cricket, netball and rugby teams in before the elections to talk about how the LRNA had contributed to the provision of sport. And I think the recommendation from the committee then was that we would like to, because there was clearly a mismatch between what was in the LRNA and what they were saying was happening on the ground, that we were then going to go into a further deep dive of the LRNA to make sure that actually the rest of the sports that we say that we have a provision for and that we're doing X, Y, Z is that the reality, and how does it reflect in our reports and our policies? So that was what that one was about. The other one did come out of CEP, but I am assuming it's going to the other committee because of the split now.
Thank you, Alex. That actually is reassuring, because when I spoke at my chair briefing about this, there was a concern that it was about doing an awful lot of pulling together a lot of different reports and comparing lots of levels of detail. But personally, and I've looked through the LRNA, there are definitely recommendations in there, and I think what we need to scrutinise is to see where we're at with making sure that those needs have been met, and if not met, what the plans are to make sure we move things forward. I always talk about things like martial arts, for example, which I know there's a recommendation for a martial arts centre, which has come up several times, but we don't have such a thing in Basingstoke, so that's a typical example. But it's matching that, and I think, does that tie in, Alex, with the sort of thing you were talking?
It does, yeah. I mean, Councillor Vaux was the one that brought the original piece to committee. So, she's obviously held the chair as well. So there's a wealth of information there that can be.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, and just to bring the chair and committee's attention to the TBC last one there, the committee suggested they would like to review the football and indoor sports provision within the borough, was one of the practical things that we said we would like to actually bring back. We realised football was a big issue, but we were talking about the council provision of football, weren't we, Councillor Lee? And we need to contain what this committee looks at. It can't take responsibility for other forms of football, but we did feel that what we had found when we looked at the three sports that we did, that there were slight disparities between what was in the report and what the sports groups felt was happening. So I think there were two things. Yes, there was the let's bring back football, but there was also, can we just have a look at all of the reports and try and bring them. I think Abigail was very good at trying to look at different strategies and reports and trying to make them work together and see if they actually synchronised and made sense together. And I think that was what she was hoping to do in the task and finish group, to try and sort of say, does it actually stand up together? So, yeah.
No, I agree. If it says X in one policy, refer to the community whatever policy, does it actually say, what we're expecting it to say, and vice versa? So, and whilst we didn't want it to be onerous on officers, that's why there was the task and finish group, to be able to kind of make those recommendations and to take the deeper dive.
I think it might be worth then, if the committee's agreed, that we make sure it mentions its council provision sports facilities in the wording rather than that, because otherwise you'll be looking at all the AstroTurf pitches on schools and all sorts of things, and then private places. So then the next question is, who would like to be on the task and finish group for the LRNA? And I think we can open it out sent to the different groups to invite other people, because it's basically people that have an interest. So if there's anybody here that wants to do that, please speak up now, and we'll also go out to the group leaders and ask. So that's Councillor Vaux as one. Anybody else?
We probably need to declare it then. And obviously we are unique, so if people are happy that I will have a vested interest, but obviously I won't be gaining any benefit from it pecuniary, I'm quite happy to take part in it, because I know the challenges of actually running community facilities on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
And I'd be interested in going on that, Ellie, as well. Okay, we'll reach out to see if we can. And I thought I saw a hand waving. No, we'll reach out in front to the other groups as well and find out if there's anybody else wants to come in. Thank you. And are there any prior to the election, there's a request to arrange a task force on LRNA. Oh, and there's more words on the next page. Officers have advised that the leisure and recreational needs assessment is an independent assessment used as a planning tool and is signed off by Sport England and the national governing bodies. The agreed evidence is used to inform the Council's Built Facility Strategy, BFS, 2015 to 2027, and the Playing Pitch Strategy, PPS, 2015 to 2027. And the LRNA is due for an annual review in September 24 and then ratified in October 24. It is proposed that the Sport England agreed update to the LRNA is used to update the Council's BFS and PPS annual tracker and presented to the committee for review in December 24. So that might colour the idea of any timelines on doing it or the purpose of doing it. So just to think that.
So are we saying that the LRNA, an updated LRNA, is going to come to this committee in December? Is that what we're saying?
It looks like it.
I think those are the two choices for the committee, really. So obviously it's coming in December now, or you can appoint the task and finish group to look at that scope that you've just set out. It's kind of which way the committee want to go on that one.
Okay, so this is a slight shift because the last time officers talked to me about it, there was going to be an all-members briefing evening on the LRNA, and it wouldn't be coming here. And that is one of the reasons why we set up a task and finish group, because a briefing is not in public, it is held behind closed doors and no record of it, and that made us all feel a little uncomfortable. If the LRNA is going to come here, I don't know, I would ask Councillor Lee what his feeling is, but it may be that councillors are comfortable that it comes here and we have an opportunity to discuss it.
I'll quick comment. I'd like to see, because I know having looked through it, and it's a weighty document, and gone through it, and looking through the original first one I read was 2016. And I think that's where I picked up some of the points then. And considering we haven't had a sort of a sense check on where we've got to on that, and then that was updated, I think, in 2022, and now we're looking at the next update. I think the sense check could be done outside of whatever the update is, because it's about where we're at, but whether it's just considering the terms of reference on quite a light touch, just to make sure if we see there's any sort of huge holes, rather than going into a real deep dive on it.
I think we discussed about having a workshop of some description to talk about things, and I know I keep going on the past, but we used to, when I was Vice Chair Leisure, have such events where we did have an opportunity, as all the council, not just this committee, to look at different subjects, and certainly sport. We know that there are gaps in our sport provision. It may be that we suddenly decide to prioritise something that we haven't got. But obviously we need to do that work. And then the report should come to this committee for us to scrutinise what the officers say we can deliver. But it is an opportunity internally, to have a meeting to discuss the options. Because not everything that you can throw in the mix, and you can just throw anything you like in, and maybe some of them will be stupid, and perhaps we don't want to be saying that in public. But this is an opportunity, and we did used to do that in the past. So I do think there's some benefits of having a meeting with the sports officers to look at the plan and see whether or not there are gaps and things that we might suggest that need to be priority. But obviously any outcomes need to come here so that we can then scrutinise them for the outcomes.
Anyone else got any thoughts on this? So the question is, do we want to have a task and finish group on this topic? Do we just want to have a sort of a sit-down brainstorm session almost, just a one-off even, where we go through it? And do we want this to be before the new report comes out? Councillor Gressie.
I think a brainstorming idea is actually quite a good one, because if we don't do that, we're only assuming what people really want, and we need to get it from, you know, the people that actually play sport, all the things that are interesting to people. Think, you know, I'm not terribly sporty, but I do ice skate. And I do actually like ice skating on ice, but I know that's in the previous thing. But I do enjoy football as well, watching football, and there's lots of things that we can bring back to Basingstoke, and they're really important to everybody.
Just to clarify, if the leisure needs assessment is a big document which comes from Sports England, which actually is quite specific about what Basingstoke should have based on all sports. So it's kind of like looking at it from that angle rather than us coming up. I mean, brainstorm probably was the wrong word, but it's kind of like doing a review of what it says in there and then having a look at what the council's providing. So that, I think, would be the session on quite a lightweight, sort of more like just a review, basically, of how well we're meeting against the LRNA. Does that? But I think that would be a one-off rather than doing that, and then that would be outside of this committee. I think we seem to have a general consensus on that then, and we'll open that up to other groups for people that might want to come along and discuss that. I think if any item is suggested, if an item is suggested, progress. All right. No. Is there any other work items that people might like to add to the work programme? And if there are, then there's a form you can fill in, and you can just get in touch with Democratic Services, and they'll do that from there. And other than that, I think we are at the end of the meeting.